This is a Nashville tuned guitar, and today we're going to talk about everything that a guitar player, recording engineer, music producer, or anybody else for that matter might want or need to know about Nashville tuned guitars. What is it? When and why would we use it? Can you set yourself up to play one of these at home or in your studio? How do you record it? We're going to talk about all of that. We're even going to listen to some recorded examples that I've prepared so you can sort of see it in action. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's get started. I want to start off by first sharing a little bit of history behind the Nashville tuning. The tuning came into prominence in the mid-50s when a guitar player by the name of Ray Edenton was on an Everly Brothers session in about 1953 or so. And the producer on that session wanted to hear a little bit more high-end shimmer from the acoustic guitar, a little bit more of that breathy air at the top of the mix. So what he did was pull the wound G string off of his acoustic guitar and replace it with an unwound G string an octave higher. So all he replaced was the G string, and for that session, that gave him that extra little bit of shimmer, that extra little bit of air. Now, he continued to do this on sessions he played until he ran into Chet Atkins. And Chet Atkins said, well, why don't you take all of the high strings from a pack of strings for a 12-string guitar and use those to string a standard guitar, and then double what you're playing with the standard guitar. So that's what Ray Edenton started doing. He became known as a guitar player that would bring a Nashville strung guitar into the session to add texture or shimmer, and it became quite common practice for a lot of guitar players. Chet Atkins was known for the sound, the Nashville sound that Chet Atkins developed relied heavily upon the use of Nashville tuned guitars. And eventually it came into prominence in studios around the world. There's lots of examples which you might be familiar with where Nashville tuning is used. For example, Kansas, Dust in the Wind, underneath the standard 6-string guitar, the way they get that beautiful shimmering guitar sound is to overdub a perfectly doubled performance of that finger-picking figure with a Nashville tuned guitar, like. And you see, that's how they get that shimmer, by taking that Nashville part and just kind of gently mixing that in with the standard strung guitar. David Gilmour used this tuning, Nashville tuning, or a slight variation of it, on Hey You from The Wall. So huge song from The Wall with an iconic acoustic guitar intro. That uses a variation of Nashville tuning where the low E string, instead of being 1 octave higher, is actually 2 octaves higher. So it matches the high E string. And it also requires a capo to play. But that's a variation on Nashville tuning. Wild Horses by the Rolling Stones. Of course, Keith Richards is panned hard in one direction playing a 12-string, and then Mick Taylor can be heard panned hard the other direction playing a Nashville tuned guitar. That's how they get that sound. So the Rolling Stones used Nashville tuning. And over the years, over time, it's become sort of de rigueur in recording studios everywhere, including this one. So what is Nashville tuning? Well, it's quite simple, really. It's nothing but the high strings from a set of strings for a 12-string guitar. So a 12-string guitar, if you're familiar, is nothing but the standard 6 strings, but each string is doubled. And on the E, A, D, and G string, it's actually doubled with a string an octave higher. And on the B and E and high E string, it's doubled with the same string. So if you remove the standard strings from a pack of 12 strings, that leaves you with just the strings that you would use for Nashville tuning. So you can buy a pack of 12-string strings and just remove the standard strings, maybe use those to string a standard tuned guitar. Or there's even some manufacturers that make prepackaged strings where the gauges are chosen so that you can use them for Nashville tuning. I just checked on Sweetwater, and they have a pack of D'Addario Nashville tuning strings for $4 right now on sale. So for $4, you can get started right now and tune a guitar to Nashville tuning. Now, this is my 2006 model Taylor 414 CE. It's a great guitar with great intonation and a great neck, but it was always a little bit bright for my taste. So I decided to utilize that brightness and utilize the tonal characteristics of this guitar, and I put a pack of Nashville strings on here, and this is the guitar I use in Nashville tuning. This particular guitar did not require any more setting up than that. I slapped the Nashville strings on here. The intonation stayed good, and the setup still feels good, and everything's good. Now, sometimes you may find that the truss rod could need to be adjusted a little bit in the neck when you go from standard strings to Nashville strings, because there's so much less tension because these strings are much skinnier than standard strings. So there's less tension in the strings. So there's a chance that the neck, when you change the strings, might not have enough bow in it, and you might find the action gets too low, potentially, with Nashville strings, in which case you might have to make a small truss rod adjustment. So if you plan on leaving your guitar long-term in Nashville tuning, I recommend taking it to a professional to have it intonated and adjusted for Nashville tuning. I was lucky enough not to have to do that with this guitar. Small chance you could have to do that, but basically you can take any acoustic guitar you've got, you can slap a set of Nashville strings on it, and disco, you're ready to go. If you're a guitar player just getting started with Nashville tuning, there's good news for you, and that good news is that you kind of already know how to play it. And the reason for that is, even though these strings are an octave higher, they're the same note values. This is still an E string, this is still an A, this is still a D, and this is still a G. So as a result, the chord shapes that you already know are still the same chords. This is still an E, this is still an A, this is still a C, etc., etc. But those chords sound a little different. They're different inversions. The notes that were the low notes are now high notes, and we're hearing a different texture. And that can be very inspiring to play, because you can play things that you already know how to play, but they sound new and fresh and different and have a different texture. Now, another nice thing that happens with a Nashville tuned guitar is, now that my D string and my G string are higher in pitch than my B string and my E string, melodies that I play on those strings really pop out of the guitar. Take this scale, for example. Now, I'm going to try and play that same little figure on a standard strung guitar. Let's see if I'll prop my leg up here to do this. Right? It sounds okay. But when I play the same thing on a Nashville tuned guitar, the melody was an octave higher and really jumps out of the guitar. So lots of reasons. Nashville is super fun to play, and even if you're new to it, if you've played a little guitar, you can probably already start to make music from it right away. I want to take a moment to talk about why a Nashville tuned guitar is such a powerful weapon for both the guitar player and the music producer in the recording studio. Now, we kind of already talked about it on the player side, how it's inspiring, how you sort of already know how to play it. But if you think about it, this, which is a standard tuned guitar, plus this, which is Nashville tuned, equals a 12-string guitar. So if I play something on this instrument and play exactly the same thing on this instrument, and track them over one another, I can sound like a 12 string. So as you can see, a standard acoustic guitar plus a Nashville string acoustic guitar makes a nice 12-string sound. Now on the producer side, and the mix engineer side, this becomes an even more powerful weapon because I recorded these strings separately from these strings. So if I was using a 12-string guitar and I record these together, in the stereo spectrum, whichever way I pan one set of strings, I have to pan the other set of strings. However I process one set of strings, I have to process the other set of strings. If I'm removing low end from the high strings, I'm having to remove it from the low strings as well, and vice versa. But when I record them separately, something very different happens. Now, I can mix these separately, and I can pan them separately. So now I have a big, wide-sounding 12-string in the stereo spectrum, and I can process this to sound good for these strings, and I can process this to sound good for these strings, and I can even use different mics to record them to take advantage of the different acoustic properties of the two different tunings. And thus, I can get the biggest, coolest, best-sounding 12-string sound ever. And I'm going to show you an example of that as well. Now, one more thing that, as a producer, I love about Nashville is the shimmer that it can add to a big, expansive mix. So just going in with some chords and very gently over the top, overlaying this sound, which has that nice high-end shimmer and air, can make your mixes sound taller and wider. And I'm going to show you an example of that as well. Now let's talk a little bit about how you record a Nashville strung acoustic guitar. First, a few thoughts for the player. It's really important, especially with finger picking, to use a really light touch. These strings are super thin, and it's super easy to sort of choke out the tune by finger picking too hard. So you really want to develop a light touch for those strings. Now, if you're strumming it, I highly recommend that you use a super thin feathery pick, so you get kind of this, you kind of get that strummy sound where you don't hear a lot of the transient, because those strings are so thin. If you hit them with a heavy pick, you're going to hear a lot of you can hear a lot of transient, and then you're going to choke out the tone from the strings, and it really just kind of sounds like, I don't know, it doesn't sound very good. So light pick and light touch with finger picking. Now, as far as mic placement, generally speaking, I treat a Nashville a little bit differently than I would treat a standard tuned acoustic guitar. So the way I normally would mic an acoustic guitar, I really like using a small diaphragm condenser like this Lauten LA20. You know, I don't have a Neumann KM84, although I think that's the best sounding microphone for recording acoustic guitar, but this does a really good job. And usually what I do is I take a small diaphragm condenser like this one, and 6 to 12 inches away from the fretboard, between the 12th and the 14th fret, and angled at 45 degrees towards the sound hole. That way I'm getting the frequencies that are coming out of the sound hole. I'm getting some of the string noise and some of the trebly sounds that are, and the thinner frequency sounds that are coming from here, without getting the boominess on a standard acoustic guitar that's coming out of the sound hole that can sort of blow up the whole show. So that's how I would mic a standard tuned guitar. For a Nashville, I like to get closer to the sound hole because you just don't have the same low end coming out of this sound hole. And in my experience, boominess isn't really a problem. So I really have an opportunity to get that pure tone coming out of the sound hole without the boominess overwhelming the mic. So really the only difference for me when I mic a Nashville as opposed to a standard tuned guitar is I'm a lot more apt to allow the mic to see the sound hole a little bit more directly. Now, there's basically 3 mics that I like for Nashville. And as with any source, you can get different sounds and you can get a different result and a different texture depending on the mic you use. A Nashville Tuned Guitar in particular can yield dramatically different results with different microphones because so much of the sonic information is in that high-end shimmer. So if I use something like the small diaphragm, the Loughton LA20 or whatever small diaphragm condenser you use, I might be using it to accentuate and bring out those airy frequencies. But what if I've already recorded the standard strung acoustic guitar with this mic and I want the Nashville guitar to blend with it and not overpower the standard in the high end? So in that case, I might even want to roll off those high frequencies, in which case maybe I'd choose a ribbon, and I often do. And this is a Royer R10. It's a lovely sounding ribbon microphone, and I like it with this guitar. And a lot of times when I'm mimicking a 12 string and you want a focused sound and you don't want the high end from the Nashville to overwhelm the standard, you might use a ribbon intentionally to roll off some of that high frequency information from the Nashville. On the other hand, if you are using the Nashville as a solo instrument, as I am in this example I'm getting ready to show you, what I've found to be my favorite mic, surprisingly, for miking a Nashville strung acoustic guitar is the venerable Shure SM57, the $99 wonder. You can, if you had to, you could make a record with this mic. But you know, you might not be a mic geek like me, might not have a bunch of mics, but you can probably get your hands on an SM57 pretty easily. And honestly, on the Nashville Tuned Guitar, it works really well because it has this mid-range forward character to it. So let's listen to this example so we can hear what a finger-picked solo Nashville Tuned Guitar mic'd with an SM57 sounds like. In the next example, we're using both the Nashville strung guitar in conjunction with the standard strung guitar to make a larger-than-life sounding 12 string. Now, I recorded the standard guitar with both the ribbon mic as well as the LA20, and I recorded the Nashville with all 3 mics, including the SM57. Now let's listen to that same example again, this time toggling between the microphones I recorded to really hear the impact different mics have on the overall character of the sound. So as you can see, not only can you use a standard guitar in conjunction with a Nashville to make a great sounding 12 string, but suddenly you have all of these mix and pan possibilities that can really accentuate the two different instruments and can really make them sound large in the stereo spectrum. For the third example, I'm going to use just the Nashville, and I'm just going to use it as a texture in the context of a much larger mix. I'm going to play along with a song that I produced some of the instruments for last year and then mixed for a wonderful artist named Sarah Melson. This is a lovely song called Gypsy Life, and I chose it because it's a big mix with a soup of lots of different instruments. And as you'll see, I'm gonna play about 30 or 40 seconds of the song, and you'll see me playing along. And I've got the Nashville tuned up, I've got it turned up in level a little higher than I would normally have it in the mix. So it's a little bit less subtle of an effect, so you can definitely hear it. Normally I would have it a little bit lower in the mix and it would be a more subtle effect. So it's turned up a little bit, but you'll really be able to see how it sort of sits above all of the instruments, and because we're just sort of using the air from it, it doesn't really compete with the vocal that much. It just makes the whole mix feel taller and bigger. So let's see what that sounds like.
Back up and move. I don't sit still very long. If sometimes a good thing turns to bad, for a little while it makes me sad, but then it turns up in a song. I don't know if I'll grow up all the way. I may not be anybody's wife. Travel around the world at the end of the day in a wandering gypsy life.
And there it is, 3 different applications for the Nashville Tuned acoustic guitar. We talked about how to record it, we talked about its history, we talked about how great it is in the studio, how inspiring it can be to both a producer and a guitar player. And not for nothing, if you're at home and you want to get started with a Nashville, you can do it for just the price of strings. I'll include a link below to the link to sweetwater.com where you can get a pack of D'Addario strings for, I think it's $3.95 right now, if the sale's going on still by the time you see this video. But you can get a pack of D'Addario strings, order them, and before you know it, you'll be playing a Nashville tuned guitar too. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to follow below. Please like this video. Please feedback with comments. I really love to hear your comments, and we'll see you next time. Thank you again.